What if the greatest ruler of Egypt had been consumed by resentment? What if the man who saved nations had chosen revenge?
Hear me, people
What if
of the realm.
forgiveness had never
Let
happened?
the wisdom of the ages
Joseph was
guide us.
betrayed, sold, forgotten, humiliated, and then excited. But the question is not about the throne. It's about the heart. In this video, you will discover how a single feeling could have destroyed God's plan, interrupted generations, and changed the destiny of entire peoples. Before we continue, please leave a like. This helps this message reach more lives. And subscribe to the channel, because here the Bible isn't superficial, it's alive. Now take a deep breath, because the resentment that almost destroyed Joseph, it is the same thing that today tries to stop the purpose of many. Imagine the wound being opened not by an enemy, but by the person who should be protecting you. Joseph didn't just fall into a pit of earth. He fell into a pit of rejection, envy, and family betrayal. And that's exactly where resentment usually arises. Genesis 37 does not begin with chains. It begins with a young heart, carrying dreams too big for a small environment. Joseph was dreaming, and dreams revealed in the wrong place awakened silent hatred. The brothers hated Joseph not only because of his tunic. They hated what she represented: favor, choice, destination. And when God's favor meets unhealed hearts, the result is almost always violence disguised as justice. First they mock, then they conspire, finally they act. The den was the first place where Joseph could have decided to do something dangerous. I will never forgive. There alone, listening to footsteps receding, feeling the weight of rejection, resentment had every reason to be born. It was legitimate. That was understandable. He was human, because resentment doesn't begin with open hatred. It begins as untreated pain, like unanswered questions, like the silence of God when intervention is most expected. Jose could have transformed that pain into an identity. He could have decided to be a man driven by bitterness, and no one would blame him. But this is where the invisible test begins. Before Egypt, before the arrest, before the palace, God observes who Joseph chooses to be when no one is watching. The grave was not the end of the dream. It was the laboratory of the heart. If Joseph had nurtured resentment then, everything afterward would have been tainted. Every opportunity would become a stage for revenge. Every authority a weapon. Every promotion comes with a risk. Because resentment never stays in the past. He walks with a person. He influences decisions. He shapes reactions. He sabotages the future. The brothers thought they were eliminating a dreamer, but without knowing it, they were pushing Joseph toward the center of the purpose. The problem is that purpose without forgiveness leads to destruction. God was not merely leading Joseph out of the pit. God was watching to see if the pit would emerge from within him. How many people have escaped pain today? But the pain never left them. The grave teaches something brutal. Not all silence is abandonment. Sometimes it's training. If Joseph had decided to hold a grudge at that moment, he might even have physically climbed out of the grave. But he would carry an invisible prison for the rest of his life. And here's the key. Those who don't resolve their emotional issues early on pay a much higher price in the end. God's plan was not threatened by betrayal. It was tested by the reaction. Because God doesn't promote talented people. He promotes whole people. And before entrusting a kingdom to Joseph, God needed to know, does this heart govern itself? The grave was just the beginning. But what did Joseph choose there? It defined everything that would come after. And that is why the next stage of the story is so dangerous. Because now Joseph will prosper. And resentment, if it existed, would have new opportunities to manifest itself. The question remains open. What happens when someone who is wounded begins to thrive without healing their heart? That's what we're going to find out next. Now Joseph is no longer in the grave. He is at Potiphar's house. From the outside, it looks like progress. Inside, it's a test. Because leaving the grave doesn't mean the grave has left the heart. And it is precisely here that resentment, if it were alive, would begin to change everything. Jose was sold like merchandise. No goodbye. No justice. No explanation needed. And yet, the text says something noteworthy. The Lord was with Joseph. But this presence does not eliminate the emotional pressure. It reveals who Joseph chooses to be as he thrives in unfamiliar territory. Potiphar's house becomes the first place where Joseph experiences success after the betrayal. Success after a wound is dangerous, because untreated pain seeks shortcuts to express itself. If Joseph had held a grudge, integrity would have been the first victim. A wounded heart begins to negotiate principles. It starts to justify poor choices. He starts saying, "After everything they've done to me, I deserve this." And it is in this scenario that temptation appears. Potiphar's wife is more than just a sexual seduction. It's an emotional proposition, a silent invitation to ease the pain, a shortcut to feeling in control again. How often does resentment turn temptations into justifications? Jose could have thought, "I was betrayed, forgotten, sold out, nobody cared about me. Why should I care now?" But something is preventing this logic from growing. Jose looks beyond the present moment. He understands that character is not a reaction to pain. It is a decision before God. When he says that he cannot sin against the Lord, Joseph reveals something profound. Bitterness does not rule your heart. Pain doesn't dictate your choices. God is still the reference point. Here's the crucial point. If resentment had been present, Jose would have mistaken opportunity for permission. And even when he resists, he pays an unfair price. He is accused, humiliated, taken. And this is where many give up internally, because obeying and still suffering is one of the greatest tests of the human heart. If Joseph had harbored resentment since the grave, imprisonment would have been the final argument for abandoning his faith. What good did it do to do the right thing? What was the point of resisting? God did not protect me. But the text repeats something striking. The Lord was with Joseph, not to free him from prison, but to preserve who he was within her. Potiphar's house reveals a harsh truth. Integrity does not prevent injustice, but resentment guarantees destruction. Jose loses everything again, but he doesn't lose himself. And that's rare, because those who harbor resentment prosper poorly. It goes up fast. It falls even faster. God could not place Joseph in a palace if he continued to use grief as an excuse. First, Joseph needed to prove that he would not use his power to avenge past wrongs. Potiphar's house was not a deviation from the plan. It was a filter. There, Jose learns that character does not depend on a favorable environment. It depends on who governs the interior. And now, with clean hands but his feet in chains again, Joseph descends once more. Not because it failed, but because it was being prepared. The question now goes even further. What happens when someone faithful, upright, and wounded? Is he forgotten in prison? That's what we're going to see next. Now Jose is in prison, not by mistake, not because of sin, but out of loyalty. And here the test changes level. Prison is a place where many lose faith not because of the pain, but because of the time spent there. The grave was dug quickly. Potiphar's house was intense. Prison is slow. Same days. Silence. Doors closed. Promises without a deadline. If resentment had survived this far, this would be the perfect environment for it to take deep root. Because nothing fuels bitterness more than waiting without answers. Jose now lives among guilty men while he is innocent. He witnesses injustice every day. He feels the weight of having done everything right and still being imprisoned. How many, at this point, begin to interpret God through suffering? Jose could have made a dangerous decision. If God has forgotten me, I will forget him too. But the arrest reveals something surprising. Even though he is bound by chains, Joseph continues to rule the heart. It doesn't shut down. It doesn't harden. He doesn't become a bitter man. On the contrary, he observes. It works. He interprets dreams. Here's a powerful detail. Those who hold grudges lose spiritual sensitivity. But Joseph, even in prison, continues to listen to God. The butler and the baker enter the story as small opportunities in disguise. Men of no apparent importance. Simple dreams, but eternal decisions. Jose is aware. Don't isolate yourself. It doesn't say, "It's not my problem." He asks. He cares. It works. And when he correctly interprets the dreams, something within Joseph may have rekindled hope. Maybe now. Maybe finally. But then comes the silent blow. The butler is restored. Jose is forgotten. There is no screaming. There is no announcement. There is no explanation. Just forgetfulness. This is the point at which resentment, if it existed, would become permanent. Because frustrated hope is more painful than the initial pain. Jose could have locked himself in there. I could have decided never to help anyone again. Never trust again. Never wait again. But the text does not record bitterness. Register your stay. God did not speed up the clock. Because he was still polishing his heart. Prison was not a punishment. It was a matter of restraint. God could not release Joseph before the appointed time. Because power without emotional maturity destroys. If Joseph had left prison with resentment, he would have become exactly the kind of ruler God would never entrust to a nation. Here's the hard truth. Sometimes God delays deliverance to prevent corruption of character. Jose learns to wait without becoming bitter, serving without recognition, to remain faithful without guarantees. Few people go through this stage without losing their soul. Prison teaches that God works in silence, and silence is not absence. It's preparation. While Joseph waits, Egypt prepares. As Jose matures, the global landscape shifts. The dream is not dead. He just couldn't be born yet. And then, when no one expects it, when Joseph no longer has any control, when resentment no longer has a place in the heart, God calls. But when he calls, he doesn't call for mere survival. Call to govern. The question now is inevitable. What happens when a wounded man is tested and purified? Does he receive absolute power in his hands? That's what changes everything in the next stage. Now Jose is no longer forgotten. He is seated before the most powerful throne in the known world. In one day, he was released from prison. On the same day, he received authority. Within hours, the wronged man became governor of Egypt. And here is the most dangerous moment in all of history. Because pain in the wrong hands does little harm. But pain in the right hands governing, it can destroy everything. Power doesn't change who someone is. He reveals it. Jose is now in control. He has a voice. It has resources. There are laws in your favor. If resentment had survived the grave, Potiphar's house, and prison, it would now have room to act without limits. Now Jose could pay them back in kind. Now he could use the system to get revenge. Now no one could stop him. And then, the past walks in through the door. The brothers arrive. Not as aggressors, but as needy. They don't recognize Joseph. But Joseph recognizes every face, each voice, every memory. This is the test that defines everything. The reunion is no coincidence. It's surgical. Joseph sees before him the men who betrayed him, while now he occupies the position from which he could crush them with a single word. Here, any hidden resentment would have been revealed. But Joseph does not act on impulse. He observes. He tests it. He is waiting, not to get revenge, but to discern. Power in the hands of someone who is wounded often seeks compensation. But Joseph seeks restoration. He creates scenarios. Asks questions. Apply pressure. Not to humiliate, but to reveal who they have become. The test wasn't just for the siblings. It was for Jose. Because it's easy to say you've forgiven when you have no power to do so. It's difficult to prove your point when you have the authority. Jose could have ended the story there. It could have been revealed immediately. He could have unloaded years of pain in harsh words. But he understands something profound. Forgiveness is not a sudden emotion. It is a process guided by wisdom. Each of Joseph's decisions shows that resentment no longer rules his heart. He doesn't use power to compensate for losses. He uses his power to protect the plan. Here's a truth that few accept. God never gives power to those who still need to prove something to the past. Jose no longer needs to be seen. You no longer need to beat anyone. You no longer need to settle accounts. He governs with balance because he was healed in anonymity. Power reveals who was manipulated in silence. If Joseph had made it this far carrying resentment, Egypt would have been saved, but Israel would have been destroyed. The plan would proceed from the outside, but I would die inside, because God doesn't only work with results. He works with alignment. Now, with his heart in the right place, Joseph is ready for the final moment. Not the time for revenge, but the one about revelation. the moment when forgiveness ceases to be internal, and it becomes a public statement. The question now is no longer whether Jose has power. He already has that. The question is, what will he do when he finally reveals himself? This is what decides the fate of entire generations. The moment that the whole story had been leading up to had arrived. It's not time to settle accounts, but the moment of revelation. Jose no longer needs to prove anything. The power is established. The authority is recognized. The past lies before him vulnerable. And then he cries. It's not weakness. It's liberation. When Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, he doesn't say, "Now it's my turn." He says, "I am Joseph." This sentence sums it all up. Pain, time, treatment, destination. Here is the high point of the narrative. Jose understands something that changes everything. You intended to harm me, but God turned it into good. That's not a nice phrase. It is a declaration of spiritual governance. Jose does not downplay the betrayal. He doesn't romanticize pain. He doesn't pretend he didn't suffer. But he refuses to let resentment have the final say. Joseph's forgiveness saves more than just one family. He preserves a nation. He keeps the bloodline alive. He protects the messianic plan. If Joseph had chosen resentment, Israel would have been famined. The promises would be delayed. The future would be compromised. Forgiveness did not change the past, but it redefined the future. And here is the truth that transcends generations. What you do with your pain determines how much God can trust you. Joseph could have ruled efficiently and still failed spiritually, but he chose to govern with alignment. He understands that God was present in the tomb, in Potiphar's house, in prison, in the palace. Nothing was wasted. Resentment would have transformed Joseph into someone powerful, but empty. Forgiveness transformed him into someone powerful and whole. When Jacob dies, the brothers are filled with fear once more. They think forgiveness had an expiration date, but Joseph reaffirms, "Am I in God's place?" This question sums it all up. Jose knows that ultimate justice is not his to bear. Revenge is not a calling. Governing is not about dominating people. It's about serving purposes. He supports his brothers. Take care of families. It preserves generations. Forgiveness was not an isolated act. It was a lifestyle. And now the story closes with a timeless lesson. God doesn't take someone to the top just to defeat enemies. He takes it to save people. Resentment would have made Joseph small even on the throne. Forgiveness made him great even before he did. And this story doesn't end in Egypt. It continues in every life that faces the same choice today. Because maybe you're not in a physical grave, but you may be carrying old wounds. Perhaps you don't govern a nation, but govern decisions, words, reactions. The question remains, what are you doing with the pain you suffered? If you allow it, God can transform what was evil into something that will save others. But this requires a choice. The same thing that Joseph did. Closing remarks and CTA. If this message resonated with you, leave a like now. This helps this content reach more people who need to hear this truth. Subscribe to the channel to continue learning biblical principles that heal, align, and strengthen faith. And write in the comments, "I choose not to live with resentment." Because when the heart is aligned, destiny moves.